The fight for Biafra's survival was far from over. After years of brutal conflict, the nation was beginning to rebuild, and the leaders of Biafra had shown resilience and determination. Yet, even as they took steps toward a brighter future, the shadows of betrayal loomed large. A trusted leader, once hailed as the symbol of unity, had secretly aligned with the very forces that Biafra had been fighting against. The question that now haunted the movement was whether unity could be salvaged or if the tides of betrayal would tear everything apart. In the aftermath of the war, Biafra's leaders had begun to focus on rebuilding the nation. Kanu, Oge, Simon, and their allies worked tirelessly to ensure that the country would rise from the ashes. But they were confronted with challenges on all fronts: political, economic, and internal divisions. The most profound challenge, however, came from within their own ranks. Ngozi, a woman who had once been a fierce and loyal advocate for Biafran independence, was the very person who began to unravel the fragile fabric of the nation. For years, she had been seen as a symbol of the struggle, someone who had always stood firm for Biafra's freedom. But unbeknownst to her comrades, Ngozi had secretly begun to entertain ideas of reconciliation with Nigeria, believing that Biafra's dream of independence could never fully be realized. She saw peace with Nigeria as the only viable way forward. Her fear of conflict and her ambitions for power led her down a treacherous path. In secret, Ngozi began meeting with high-ranking Nigerian officials, negotiating behind Biafra's back. She had adopted various aliases and disguised her meetings, using her position within Biafran leadership to pass information and subtly manipulate decisions. For a time, it seemed like the unity of the Biafran leadership was intact, but the cracks in the foundation had already begun to form. As the situation unfolded, Simon, ever vigilant, started noticing inconsistencies in Ngozi's actions. His suspicion grew as he heard whispers of her secret dealings with Nigeria. He had seen enough to know that something was amiss. The betrayal came to light when Simon uncovered photos and documents that revealed Ngozi's true allegiance. She had been working for Nigeria all along, feeding them critical information about Biafran plans and movements. This discovery came as a devastating shock to Kanu, Oge, and Simon. The woman who had once been their comrade, their ally in the fight for Biafra's independence, was now the one pulling the strings to destroy it. Oge, particularly, struggled to accept that Ngozi, whom he had trusted deeply, could betray them so completely. The pain of the revelation hit him hard. For weeks, Oge and Kanu grappled with what to do next. They knew that they had to act decisively, but they also feared the consequences of exposing her betrayal. If Ngozi was exposed too early, it could fracture the already fragile unity of Biafra. But if they let her continue her covert actions, the very future of the nation would be at risk. The decision to confront Ngozi came not a moment too soon. Kanu, always the steady hand, was firm in his belief that Biafra could not stand divided. "We have come too far, Oge. We cannot let one person destroy everything we've worked for," he said one evening, his voice filled with conviction. Together, they summoned Ngozi to a private meeting, a final attempt to get her to come clean. She arrived, confident, but there was something in the air, a tension she couldn't ignore. The moment she entered the room, she could sense that something was off. "Oge, Kanu, Simon," she greeted them, her voice steady, yet something about her eyes flickered with guilt. She knew that they had discovered the truth, but she was not yet ready to face it. The confrontation was inevitable, and when Simon spoke, his words cut through the silence like a blade. "You've betrayed us, Ngozi," Simon said, his voice tinged with disbelief. "We know everything. Your meetings with Nigerian officials. The information you've been passing to them. You've sold us out." Ngozi's face paled as the weight of her betrayal sank in. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. Finally, after a long pause, she broke down and confessed. "I never meant to hurt you all," she whispered, her voice shaking with regret. "But I had no choice. Biafra can't survive on its own. I thought that if I could get Nigeria to accept us, we could have peace. I was wrong. But I thought, maybe it's the only way for us to survive." Konu's voice was firm but filled with sorrow. "You've betrayed Biafra, Ngozi. You've betrayed the people who trusted you. You're no longer a part of this movement. Leave, before we are forced to do something we will regret." It was done. The final act of betrayal had been revealed, and Ngozi, the once great leader of Biafra, was expelled from the movement. Her expulsion sent ripples through the leadership, and the consequences of her actions were felt throughout the country. As she left the room, her face was a mixture of anger, regret, and fear. She had gambled with Biafra's future, and now she was paying the price. With Ngozi gone, the leadership had to come to terms with the damage her betrayal had caused. Oge, Kanu, and Simon were united in their resolve to continue the fight for Biafra's independence, but the trust among them had been shattered. They couldn't help but wonder how many others in their ranks might have been compromised in the same way as Ngozi. The whispers of discontent among the people grew louder, and the people began to question the integrity of their leadership. In the midst of the turmoil, a new generation of leaders was emerging. Chiamaka, the newly appointed information minister, had been tasked with rebuilding Biafra's image and handling the public relations side of the nation's recovery. Chiamaka was a young, sharp-minded individual with a strong understanding of how to communicate Biafra's message to the world. He understood that the leadership's internal struggle could not be allowed to become a distraction. Instead, he focused on rallying the Biafran diaspora and the international community to continue supporting the country. Chiamaka's efforts paid off. He worked tirelessly, crafting powerful speeches, engaging with foreign diplomats, and using social media to amplify Biafra's message. The international community began to take notice again, and Biafra's standing on the global stage began to improve. But even as Biafra regained some of its momentum, the people were deeply divided. Many Biafrans felt betrayed by Ngozi's actions and feared that their nation's future was no longer in safe hands. Sani, the newly appointed coordinator of the Biafran Reconstruction project, had been a symbol of hope in the villages. He had made significant strides in rebuilding the country from the ground up, focusing on infrastructure, education, and healthcare. His efforts had helped bring some stability to the nation, and he was viewed as a leader who worked tirelessly for the people. But as the divisions deepened, Sani found himself caught in the middle of the growing tension. He saw firsthand how the political infighting was beginning to wear on the people, and he feared for Biafra's future. As the months passed, Ngozi's mental state began to deteriorate. The guilt of her betrayal, compounded by the relentless pressure from the Nigerian government, slowly drove her to madness. She found herself consumed by paranoia, believing that everyone was out to get her. She no longer trusted anyone, not even the Nigerian officials who had once promised her power. Her mind fractured under the weight of the secrets she had kept, and she began to unravel completely. One night, after a particularly intense episode of delusion, Ngozi was found alone in her apartment in Lagos, muttering incoherently about Biafra's future. She was taken to a psychiatric hospital, where she was diagnosed with severe depression and paranoia. The once proud leader of Biafra, now a broken shell of her former self, spent her days in a haze, her mind lost to the consequences of her actions. She was a shadow of the leader she had once been, lost, broken, and consumed by guilt. In the quiet of her hospital room, Ngozi would often mumble the same words over and over: "I was wrong. I was wrong." Biafra was meant to be free, but I couldn't see it, not until it was too late. Her story became a cautionary tale. A story of ambition, betrayal, and the cost of choosing power over principle. Biafra, however, would continue its struggle, though it had lost one of its own. The dream of freedom was not yet extinguished. With Ngozi's fall from grace, the Biafran leadership was forced to confront the harsh reality of the fractured nation. While Chiamaka and Sonny worked to rebuild and strengthen Biafra, the rift within the leadership remained a challenge. But one thing was clear: despite the betrayal, Biafra's hope was not yet lost. The nation still had a chance at survival, and its future depended on the unity of its people, its leadership, and the unyielding belief that freedom could still be won. The battle was far from over. Biafra's future still lay in the hands of its people and leaders. Would they rebuild, or would the betrayal of the past haunt them forever? Only time would tell. As Biafra's leadership continued to recover from the shocking betrayal of Ngozi, the path to unity seemed both distant and fraught with challenges. Though Ngozi's actions had left a deep scar, the resolve of the remaining leaders was unwavering. They knew that for Biafra to survive, they would need to heal the fractures within the leadership and restore trust among the people. The vision of a free and independent Biafra still burned in the hearts of its leaders and citizens alike, but it was clear that this dream would require more than just words. It would demand action. The aftermath of Ngozi's betrayal had left a sense of vulnerability hanging over the leadership. Oge, Kanu, and Simon had seen firsthand the extent to which trust could be broken, and their focus was now on rebuilding that trust, not only within their government but with the people of Biafra. While they worked behind the scenes to strengthen their resolve, the country itself seemed to be in a state of suspended animation, waiting for its leaders to show the way forward. Despite the turmoil, Biafra had made significant strides in rebuilding its infrastructure. Sonny, always focused on the tangible, continued his work on the ground. His projects in villages, where homes were rebuilt, schools were established, and roads were paved, represented a symbol of Biafra's resilience. The people, though weary, continued to rally behind the belief that their nation could emerge stronger from the wreckage of its past. But they also sensed the growing division among their leaders, and many began to fear that the war for Biafra's independence wasn't just being fought on the battlefield, it was being waged within the very walls of their government. The whispers of division among the leadership were slowly beginning to reach the people, and the collective hope that had once carried the nation through the darkest days of the war was now clouded by uncertainty. For many, the path ahead seemed unclear. Could Biafra ever truly rise from the ashes of betrayal? Would it be able to heal its internal wounds before they consumed it entirely? Chiamaka, the information minister, continued to work diligently to manage the nation's image on the international stage. As Biafra regained its footing in the eyes of the world, the task of reconciling the people's doubts about their leaders was becoming more pressing. Chiamaka, though young and relatively new to the role, quickly understood the importance of his position. Every message, every speech, every piece of media that was released carried with it the weight of Biafra's future. He tirelessly worked to frame the nation's story as one of resilience and perseverance, pushing back against the rumors that threatened to divide the nation further. His task was not easy. The shadow of Ngozi's betrayal loomed large, and it cast doubt on the intentions of those still in power. Every press release he wrote, every speech he crafted, was met with scrutiny. The people, who had once been so eager to see Biafra succeed, now questioned whether their leaders had the integrity and strength to fulfill the promises they had made. Despite his relentless efforts to present Biafra as a unified nation, Chiamaka found himself grappling with the deeper issue, the people's mistrust of their government. They had been hurt, and they were beginning to wonder if their faith had been misplaced. While Chiamaka worked tirelessly on Biafra's image, Sani continued to push forward with his reconstruction efforts, providing the people with tangible signs of progress. Yet, even as schools were rebuilt and clinics opened, the question remained, could Biafra truly rebuild from the inside out? Could it heal the rift within its leadership, and could the people be convinced that the fight for independence was not in vain? In the villages, life carried on. The farmers tended to their crops, the children attended school, and the elders offered wisdom drawn from the generations before them. But beneath the surface, the unease was growing. The people, as resilient as they were, had come to understand that the future of Biafra rested not just on the strength of its infrastructure, but on the integrity of its leadership. And right now, that leadership seemed fractured. Kanu, ever the visionary, knew that the road to Biafra's independence would not be won on the battlefield alone. The battle was now one of leadership, of showing the people that they could still trust in their leaders, that the promises of independence were not empty words, but the very foundation upon which their nation would be built. He knew that without unity, Biafra would not survive. The fight for independence had been long and brutal, but it was clear to Kanu that the real test would be in the years to come, as Biafra fought to prove itself on the world stage, not as a symbol of broken promises, but as a testament to its resilience and strength. Oge, too, was grappling with the deep emotional impact of Ngozi's betrayal. He had trusted her as a partner in their vision for a free Biafra, and the sting of her defection was personal. But Oge was not one to give in to despair. He knew that Biafra's survival depended on his ability to lead through this moment of crisis. The nation could not afford to fracture further, it was already too close to the edge. With each passing day, Oge reminded himself that Biafra's strength had always been its people, not its leaders. If they could keep the people's faith alive, then Biafra had a chance. But as time passed, it became clear that trust would not be easily restored. The cracks within the leadership had become a mirror for the cracks within the nation itself. The people needed to see a strong, unified leadership, a leadership that could show them that Biafra's future was secure. Yet the questions that loomed were harder to answer. How could Biafra overcome the internal betrayal that had nearly torn it apart? How could the leadership mend the rift that threatened to undo everything they had fought for? The truth was that Biafra could not afford to fail, not now. Not after all they had sacrificed. The nation had survived war, endured countless hardships, and stood against the overwhelming forces of oppression. It could not allow one betrayal to define its fate. As the leaders continued to navigate the treacherous waters of political division and public unrest, they found that their greatest challenge was not facing external forces, but finding a way to reunite the broken pieces of their own nation. The strength of Biafra lay in its people, their resilience, their unity, and their shared dream of a free and independent country. But for that strength to be fully realized, the leadership had to heal its wounds and come together, as the people of Biafra had always done. And so, the journey continued. The road ahead was long, and the challenges were many. But Biafra's future had not been lost, it was simply waiting for the leaders to rise to the occasion. The hope of independence was still alive, beating in the hearts of its people. It was time for the leadership to prove that the dream was worth fighting for. Biafra's battle was far from over. And though the road was uncertain, one thing was clear: the resilience of its people would never fade. No matter what happened, they would carry the dream of a free Biafra forward, keeping the flame alive for generations to come. The struggle for Biafra's survival was just beginning, and its leaders would have to rise to the challenge, for the future of Biafra and its people depended on it. The days in Biafra grew longer, and the weight of leadership bore down on Oge, Kanu, Simon, and the others. The world watched as they struggled to maintain unity, not just in their government, but in the hearts of the people. The wounds from Ngozi's betrayal still ran deep, and though the leadership knew the country could not afford to fall apart, the challenge of rebuilding trust seemed insurmountable. They had stood against the forces of oppression, they had fought for their freedom, but could they now fight the forces of division within their own ranks? Kanu, ever the optimist, believed in Biafra's destiny. He had fought for it all his life, and even now, as the country stood on the edge of a precipice, he knew that there was no turning back. Biafra's future lay not in the hands of any single leader, but in the collective strength of its people. They had given so much already: lives, livelihoods, homes. To ask them to give up now would be an affront to everything they had fought for. Kanu spent his days meeting with foreign diplomats, working tirelessly to secure alliances, and seeking recognition for Biafra on the global stage. He knew that international support was crucial to their survival, and his diplomatic efforts were relentless. His belief in Biafra's future was unshakable, even when the leadership struggled to find common ground. But the internal strife could not be ignored. Oge, whose heart had been torn by Ngozi's betrayal, often found himself lost in thought, wondering if they had made the right choices in trusting the wrong people. Despite his faith in the cause, the uncertainty weighed heavily on him. The people had once trusted their leaders unconditionally, but now, that trust was fragile, easily shattered by the scandal of betrayal. Could he, as a leader, restore their faith? Could he heal the broken bonds that held Biafra together? One evening, as Oge walked through the streets of Umidike, he noticed something that struck him to his core. The people, who had once greeted their leaders with hopeful faces, now looked at them with doubt in their eyes. Mothers still held their children close, but the warmth that had once existed between them and the government had faded. The cracks were no longer hidden, they were visible in every glance, every conversation. Oge couldn't help but feel a deep sense of responsibility. He had always believed that Biafra's strength was rooted in the unity of its people, but now he saw that unity was slipping away. The Biafran dream had been forged in the fires of war, but would it be able to survive the fires of division? Could the country overcome the divisions within its own leadership? He wasn't sure, but he knew that he could not stand by and let Biafra fall apart. As the weeks passed, Simon and Sonny began working more closely together to ensure that the groundwork for Biafra's recovery was solid. They had both seen the toll that the political infighting had taken on the country. But they were also determined to keep pushing forward, even as the leadership seemed to falter. Simon, the diplomat, worked tirelessly to calm fears both within the country and abroad. He knew that if the leadership could show signs of reconciliation, they could maintain the trust of the people and the world. Sonny, on the other hand, kept his focus on the tangible work of reconstruction. His efforts in rebuilding schools, clinics, and roads were the very foundation upon which Biafra's future would rest. He understood that the country needed more than just political unity, it needed to see progress, to feel that the future was within reach. His work in the villages was a daily reminder to the people of what Biafra could be, a prosperous, united nation, built from the strength of its people. Still, the political divide persisted. Chiamaka, who had managed Biafra's image on the world stage, began to see the true depth of the problem. While he had been able to garner support for Biafra from foreign governments, he understood that the internal strife could not be ignored. The people had begun to question whether their leaders could truly deliver on the promises of freedom and independence. They needed to believe in their leaders again, to see that the leadership could function as one united body. But even Chiamaka knew that this was not a simple task. How could they rebuild the trust that had been shattered? As the months passed, the political and social unrest began to grow. The people, though resilient, began to question their leaders in earnest. protests started to emerge in various villages. Though peaceful, these protests were an undeniable sign that the people were restless. They wanted answers, and they wanted change. They were tired of hearing promises, they wanted to see results. Kanu, Oge, and Simon knew that they could no longer ignore the demands of the people. The time for speeches and diplomatic meetings was over. Biafra needed action, and it needed it now. Kanu called for an emergency meeting of the leadership, urging them to put their differences aside for the good of the nation. Unity is our only hope, Kanu said firmly, his voice filled with conviction. We cannot afford to let Ngozi's betrayal define us. We must move forward, together. The people need to see that we are united in our vision for Biafra. They need to see that their leaders are committed to them, to the future of this nation. Oge, still burdened by the weight of the past, nodded reluctantly. I understand, Kanu. But how do we rebuild what has been broken? How do we restore the faith of the people when so much has been lost? Simon, ever the pragmatist, spoke up. It starts with us. We must demonstrate that we are capable of leading Biafra through this crisis. The people need to see that we have learned from the past, that we are united, and that we can overcome any challenge together. It was clear that the road ahead would be difficult. But the leadership knew that they could not allow their country to fall into further division. They had fought too hard, suffered too much, and lost too many lives to let Biafra slip away now. Over the next few months, Kanu, Oge, Simon, and their allies worked relentlessly to restore order and trust within the leadership. They held public forums to address the concerns of the people and engaged in open dialogue with communities throughout Biafra. They acknowledged their failures, asked for forgiveness, and promised to work together for the good of the nation. Slowly, the cracks began to heal. The people, though wary, began to trust their leaders again. They saw that, despite the betrayal they had faced, the dream of Biafra was still alive. Biafra was not just a dream of independence, it was a dream of unity, of freedom, and of hope for the future. And as the sun set over the hills of Umedike, Biafra's people could feel a sense of renewal. The road ahead was long, and the challenges would never fully disappear. But the spirit of Biafra remained unbroken, and the people, led by their newly united leadership, marched forward, determined to build the future they had always dreamed of. The dream of a free Biafra had not died, it had only grown stronger, fueled by the sacrifices, the struggles, and the unwavering will of its people. The days passed in a blur of meetings, speeches, and community visits, but the underlying tension never fully disappeared. While the leadership worked hard to present a united front, the scars of Ngozi's betrayal still lingered. Yet the Biafran spirit, known for its resilience and unyielding drive for freedom, seemed to reawaken in the people. The realization that unity was not just a luxury but a necessity began to take hold across the country. For Oge, the toll of the last few months had been profound. He had always been a believer in the collective will of the people, but now, more than ever, he saw the importance of collaboration and sacrifice. Despite the distrust that had spread through Biafra, he refused to give up on the dream. Each day, he reminded himself of what they had fought for: freedom, self-determination, and the promise of a better life for future generations. The weight of leadership was heavy, but Oge found solace in the work they were doing on the ground. The people, though weary, continued to rebuild their homes and communities, slowly but surely. Kanu, ever the visionary, never lost sight of the broader picture. Though the betrayal had cut deep, his faith in Biafra's destiny remained steadfast. His diplomatic efforts had kept the international community's attention focused on the ongoing plight of Biafra. While the nation's leadership worked through internal divisions, Kanu continued to push for Biafra's recognition as a sovereign state. He spoke to the world not just of their struggle, but of their promise to rebuild and strengthen their society, to show that Biafra could be a beacon of hope for other nations fighting for self-determination. Sani, now deeply integrated into the reconstruction efforts, saw firsthand the transformation of Biafra's landscape. His focus remained on the people, on ensuring that no one was left behind in the process. Schools were reopening, medical clinics were being built, and new farms sprang up in once barren fields. His work had a lasting impact, providing the people with both the tools to thrive and a renewed sense of hope. Yet, even as the physical infrastructure of Biafra improved, he too felt the weight of the vision. He spent countless hours in villages, listening to the concerns of the people, many of whom asked if the country would ever truly heal. The political rifts between their leaders had reached the people, and the question of leadership was no longer just an internal matter, it was one that affected the daily lives of every Biafran. Chiamaka, despite his youth, understood the gravity of the situation. As the information minister, he had become the voice of Biafra to the outside world. His media campaigns had painted Biafra as a nation rising from the ashes of war, a country built on the strength and will of its people. But his internal battles were just as real. He often met with foreign diplomats who offered support but also questioned whether Biafra's leadership could overcome its internal strife. The truth was, the country's future depended as much on the leader's ability to unite as it did on the strength of its people. The national sentiment had been fragile, especially among the younger generation. The youth of Biafra, many of whom had grown up in the shadow of war, were beginning to question the direction their nation was headed. Their lives had been marked by conflict, and now that the war had ended, they were looking for stability. They had witnessed betrayal at the highest levels, and trust was no longer something easily given. Yet, their belief in Biafra's future still burned brightly. They saw a nation in the midst of a rebirth, and despite the leadership's divisions, many of them were determined to see it through. It was in the villages that the struggle for unity truly took shape. The elders, who had lived through the wars and the years of hardship, called for patience and understanding. They had seen much of the world's brutality and believed that Biafra could overcome its internal divisions if only the people could stay united. The younger generations, however, were growing restless. They had heard the promises and the speeches, but they wanted action. They had fought for Biafra's freedom, and they expected their leaders to fight just as hard to preserve it. The leadership knew that time was running out. They could no longer afford to delay action, and the people could no longer bear the uncertainty. There was a need for visible change, a transformation not just in infrastructure, but in leadership. They had to prove to the people that they were still capable of leading Biafra into the future. The question was how. Kanu, Oge, Simon, and the other leaders began meeting more frequently. They were no longer just discussing policy or reconstruction, they were discussing the heart of Biafra, the people, the future, and the deep fissures that had formed among them. The debates were long and filled with emotion. They understood the gravity of the situation, they could no longer afford to fail. The leadership had to be strong, unified, and decisive. The time for hesitation was over. One afternoon, after a particularly heated debate, Oge spoke to the others with quiet conviction. We've all been given the gift of leadership, but with that comes responsibility. We must show the people that we are not divided. We must heal the wounds that have been caused, and we must do it now. Kanu nodded, his eyes focused. Biafra's future is in our hands. We cannot let the past define us, and we cannot afford to let it tear us apart. We will rise from this, but we must rise together. Simon, ever the diplomat, agreed. The people need to see that we can lead them into the future. We must show them that unity, not division, is our strength. As Biafra's journey of rebuilding continues, the road ahead is filled with both triumphs and challenges. The nation has risen from the ashes, but its future remains uncertain. As the leadership works to unite its people and secure a place on the world stage, internal struggles and external pressures threaten to tear it apart. Will the dream of a free, prosperous Biafra survive, or will old wounds and betrayals come back to haunt the nation? Stay tuned for part 3 of this epic story, where the battle for Biafra's future takes unexpected turns. Secrets will be revealed, alliances will shift, and the true strength of Biafra's spirit will be tested like never before. Don't miss out on the next chapter of this powerful tale of resilience, hope, and the fight for freedom. Watch out for part 3, the story of Biafra's destiny continues.